Okay, that looks like we are live. So not ever having done this before, I'm going to take the first few minutes to figure out exactly what it is I'm doing. And my first question is, how's the audio? Can people hear me okay? Am I too loud, too quiet? There's also, there is a setting I can use to control the latency, I think, but I don't actually, I haven't really worked with it at all. So right now, I feel like there's a good amount of latency on this stream, which means that if you put a comment in the chat and I don't reply to it, that's probably just because I haven't actually seen it yet. So just please bear that in mind. I am not trying to ignore anybody. I just probably haven't seen your comments. Okay, thanks, AB. Glad to hear it. Okay, so I'm just taking a few moments to get set up, and then I'm going to jump into creating a pantheon for my using the system from the Pamphlet of Pantheons, or at least using as much of the system as I have developed, which is like the vast majority of it. But there are one or two things where, so I've got my my most recent set of notes here. You can see probably some of my there's a lot of markup on them. So some of it is being changed, some of it has been changed, some of it needs to be changed, and some of it there'll be sections where it just says, the church thing, the church thing, which is useful for me because I know the church thing, but not useful for anyone reading it because they don't know the church thing. Also, right now I'm looking at, like, my camera is slightly off to one side from the main monitor that I'm using. So if I'm looking over here, I'm not trying to be like rude. If you can be rude on a live stream, I'm just looking at the thing that I'm reading, whereas the camera's actually filming me from over here. It's a bit of a rudimentary setup, but I'm actually surprised by how well it works. It's a remarkable day and age. You can do this all for free, assuming that you have spent hundreds of pounds on electronics to begin with. Okay. So let me just see if I can do this right. I'm gonna mute the stream as it plays. And I'm going to bring up the, I can share. Yeah, all right. So this is, I haven't done the design of the actual Pantheon sheet yet. And eventually that's going to essentially have a kind of like workflow on it. Right now, the Pantheon process begins with, we sort of start out by establishing like a broad aesthetic for the Pantheon as a whole, and then we start picking divine archetypes. So the Pamphlet of Pantheons contains 16 divine archetypes. They're not meant to be representative like every god in every religion throughout history. Obviously, that would be impossible. They're just kind of common types, and types in particular, I think, that are relevant to fantasy settings. I've explained before about the Pamphlet of Pantheons and its sort of like overall structure, but just for the future reference of anybody watching this who doesn't know what I'm talking about, this whole video is just me using the system in my upcoming Pamphlet of Pantheons, which right now is on Kickstarter as part of Zine Quest 3. As you can see at the bottom of the screen. And that's a system, like a rules-independent system for creating pantheons for fantasy role-playing games. So I'm going to start by figuring out what the overall aesthetic of my pantheon is going to be. So I'm going to roll on a table. So I got a D6 here. Okay, I got one. One is your basic kind of Greek god, superhuman-y sort of archetype, right? So the deities in my pantheon look like exceptional humans, regular people like you and me, but taller and buffer and better looking. So I guess in that sense, not regular people like you or me. Well, not like me anyway. I don't know. You might be extremely tall, buff, and good looking. So we know that our aesthetic is fine. Now, the fun part. I'm going to go ahead and pick 16 or from 16 divine archetypes. I don't think you want a huge number of gods in a game. Now, in reality, real pantheons have tons of gods in them. Like if you think about the Greek or Norse pantheons, people are always trying to talk about how like, oh, there are 12 gods or there are 13 gods, but no one can ever actually agree on who those 12 or 13 gods are because there are large numbers of qualifying figures. Instead, what we're going to do is define a core cast of characters that we can then add to, if someone comes along and says, I want to play a cleric, but none of these quite inspire me, then, we can just give them a new deity to be a cleric of. But for now, we're going to pick just a couple from the list, and then we're going to go back and modify that list later on. Now I have done some thinking about what I want from this pantheon, and I know there are a couple of divine archetypes that I want to use, but I don't know what the twists on those archetypes are going to be yet. So I'm going to stake out that I'm definitely going to take Hierarch of Hell, definitely going to have whoops, that's not right. I'm definitely going to have Celestial Sovereign, and I'm definitely going to have Monster Slayer. So those are kind of three typical divine archetypes, and they appear as part of the pantheon. I'm going to pick another 4 or 5, just until it feels rounded out to me. So let's take a look at the list. And then we can go back and mess them up a little bit. So as I said, I've got... I'm not going to put in a war god specifically just yet, a rare of armies. I think I will add a bestower of plenty. As I've been talking about recently on my podcast, Patron Deities, about deities for my patrons. People in fantasy role-playing games in general, very focused on your exciting gods, of which gods of work and prosperity typically are not, but they're very important in a lot of real cultures. And I think we can make that deity and its church interesting. What else? Ooh, I definitely want a Firebringer. This is your kind of culture hero, patron of humanity type. I may actually not wind up with Celestial Sovereign. We'll see how that goes. So Firebringer, go here. And then maybe, so Force of Nature, Fruitful Earth, Laughing Rogue. We've already got a Hierarch of Hell. I'm going to take... so I want maybe at least 2 more. Let's take Force of Nature. And for now, I'm going to leave aside Fruitful Earth, who I was thinking about, and I'm going to take Keeper of Mysteries. And this is going to do us for now. We are actually going to go back in and make some changes to these as we go. The purpose of this system is to create deities who are less complex than they appear to be. If you look at a real religion, it's a very complex affair. It has its own ritual codes, it has its own mythology, it changes over time, and all of these changes result in a religion whose qualities are hard to predict from not participating in it. So, to use a commonplace example, if you wanted to understand Christianity and someone went, hey, here's a copy of the Bible, you would not get to understand Christianity. You know what I mean? You would. There's not priests. There's not going to church on Sunday. There are priests, but in the main, none of the things about the ways in which Christianity affects people's everyday lives would be inferable from its mythology necessarily. And the ways in which people's understanding of that mythology have changed over the centuries would also not be in there. So now, in order to understand that, you would have to study the subject, and we're playing fun games for a pastime. Like I'm not trying to make people do a bunch of homework. So instead, we're going to try to make something that has the surface complexity of something that is actually complex, but is actually simple. Like, it's a setting greebling. When you are making a model of like a spaceship, if you're designing a prop for Star Wars, you cover the surface of it with what are called greebles. Right? Greebles are little pieces of fine detail that represent circuits and devices and gadgets and hatches and whatever. But you don't actually have a plan of this spaceship. You don't know what any of these things do. You just want to make the surface look busy. So we're trying to make our religion look a little bit busy and create some conflict that'll be fun for player characters to be involved in. So I'm envisioning this pantheon as going with kind of like a home-based type society for my player characters. And I think that RPG settings that are not necessarily like in conflict, but are on the brink of conflict are interesting. And I want to build some tension into my pantheon. Let's see what tension we can come up with as we go and look at the different deities. So we'll start with Hierarch of Hell. Hierarch of Hell is the custodian of the afterlife, not necessarily like the devil, is the deity who rules the place where people go when they die, which is not quite the same thing, right? Hierarch of Hell is not evil. Modern conceptions of Hades tend to turn him into a bad guy, but that's not necessarily the case here. So I'm going to roll for a complication for Hierarch of Hell. Each of these deities has a little d6 table that goes with it. And what do we say about him? Okay, so this says that keeps a regal, cheerless state in a silent earth. So I'm just going to add a little sticky note that says regal and cheerless. I can shrink these if I need to. So we know something about the Hierarch of Hell. Okay. This is definitely kind of a... And that tells us also something about society. The Hierarch of Hell clearly rules an